Coming up at 7 during what may be the roughest part of his time as mayor, Rahm Emanuel is here to discuss the fallout from the Laquan McDonald shooting video, calls for his resignation, and what's next for the Chicago Police Department on Chicago Tonight.
Giada Valenti from Venice with Love.
We've only just begun to leave.
Sharing love, laughter, and joy. From Venice, Italy comes the singer known for performing beautiful songs that will touch your soul. Giada Valenti from Venice with Love.
Tonight at 7:30 on WTTW 11. The groups who defined the 60s and 70s reunite on stage at WTTW.
It's all right. Hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy, hang on. Hey, baby, they're playing our song.
Thursday at 7:30 on WTTW 11. Programming on WTTW during our 60th anniversary year is made possible in part by the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, marking 60 years of fostering communities of educated, informed, and engaged citizens.
Winter has a certain way of bringing us closer together, and the 15th annual PNC Bank Winter Wonderfest at Navy Pier is the perfect place to make memories with great new rides, slides, and skating on the Chicago Blackhawks ice skating rink. Save when you buy tickets in advance at NavyPier.com.
The Joffrey Ballet presents the farewell performances of Robert Joffrey's The Nutcracker, Chicago's holiday tradition. December 4th through the 27th, Auditorium Theater, 800-982-2787 or joffrey.org.
Josh Groban presents his favorite Broadway music.
If you want to see Magic Class, bring him home.
Don't miss Josh Groban Stages Live.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW 11.
Join me, Jeffrey Bear, and explore Chicago's South Side neighborhoods with the people who call them home.
What parish are you from?
St. Barnabas.
Okay, so you didn't drop a beat when I asked you that.
It's a real South Side thing.
From Beverly, Bronzeville, and Bridgeport to Hyde Park, Pullman, and more.
A. Philip Randolph and the Pullman Porters are the grandfathers of the Civil Rights Movement.
Feel the neighborhood pride on Chicago's South Side.
Wednesday at 7:30 on WTTW 11.
Hi Chicago, I'm Marisol.
I'm Tamara.
And you're watching WTTW
Channel 11.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by a grant from the Polk Brothers Foundation. For more than 25 years, a foundation for Chicago families.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Phil Ponce. On this Tuesday, December 8th.
One of the things that I have to do is I'm taking responsibility for what happened, and I take responsibility for fixing it in this action.
Despite firing the police superintendent and bringing in a new head of the Police Review Authority, Mayor Emanuel is still facing calls for his resignation and allegations of a cover-up. The mayor is here to talk about police reform and accountability. That and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. Here's what's happening in Chicago tonight. The trial of a Chicago police commander begins over allegations he shoved his gun into a suspect's mouth, held a taser to the man's groin, and threatened to kill him. Commander Glenn Evans faces aggravated battery and official misconduct charges for the alleged confrontation that took place in January 2013. Investigators say they discovered the suspect's DNA on the barrel of the gun, but Evans's attorney says it could have come from the suspect touching the gun during his arrest. The trial is expected to last a week. Details are emerging in the contract dispute between Chicago Public Schools and the Teachers Union. Citing a district source, Crane Chicago Business is reporting the union is asking for $1.5 billion in new or increased benefits over 3 years. Cranes also reports union officials say CPS wants teachers to take a pay freeze and other benefit givebacks. This all comes as teachers begin voting later this week on whether to authorize a strike. Well, it is official. Right-hander John Lackey is joining the Chicago Cy Young winner Jake Arrieta and his own former Boston teammate John Lester in the Cubs rotation. As for the weather, some clouds tomorrow before it clears up, becoming mostly sunny with a high near 50. Mayor Emanuel is facing what may be his toughest challenge since becoming mayor of Chicago. Fallout from the shooting deaths of Laquan McDonald and Ronald Johnson at the hands of police has cost Gary McCarthy his job as police superintendent. A new blue ribbon panel has been named to guide police reform. The Independent Police Review Authority has a new director, and the United States Justice Department is investigating the department. Now a new survey out today shows 51% of Chicagoans polled want the mayor to resign. What can Rahm Emanuel do to restore confidence in his administration and in his police department? Paris Schutz is with him now to find out. Paris.
Phil, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
About that poll from Ogden and Fry, why do you believe so many people now are calling for your resignation?
Well, Paris, you know, I've been in public life a long time. It wouldn't surprise me that people would be upset. They've elected me to be responsible and to be held accountable. And clearly the system did not work in this situation. I'm also responsible for not only fixing it, but in that process restoring trust, not just in myself, but in the government. And so it wouldn't surprise me that people's reaction and holding the person who is the mayor of the city of Chicago accountable. That's the reaction. I, though, believe I'm responsible. I'm supposed to be held accountable, not only for what happened, but to fixing it, and that's exactly what I'll do.
What do you believe you've done wrong in the handling of this case since it came out?
No, I mean, it's not just came out. You know, Paris, I thought about this a lot. Here are the mistakes, and not limited to, but two very specific. One, in the process, we have a process and a practice in place. And that is to protect the information that's important to the integrity and the independence of an investigation. It's always existed for years, not just in this city, every city. That existed. While you're protecting the integrity of that investigation, because of the length of time, it clearly not giving the information and making it public built distrust and suspicion. And in my view, while this practice has existed, I should have challenged that practice because it was actually eroding the most essential thing between the police and the community, which is trust. And it looks like the city, while following a time-honored practice, was complicit in that. Second, while I was giving, obviously, paying deference to both the U.S. Attorney and the state's attorney, the integrity of their investigation, making sure it had all the independence and to do what it did, I, as the mayor, should have given voice to the public's anxiety, anxiousness for the conclusion. I always, when asked, the few times I was asked about it, I said, look, it's an investigation, it's ongoing, etc. I'm not the state's attorney, or the U.S. attorney, that's their job. I, as the mayor, for the public, needed to give voice to their anxiousness, and I did not do that. And because of both of those, more on both on the choice, but also on the public, and I want to say what I'm doing to fix it. One of the first things I've asked Lori Lightfoot and the Ag Task Force is review the fact that making sure that rather than go to protecting the investigation, look at Cincinnati. They have a new policy after what happened in 2001 there, which is by default, within 2 weeks, information is made public, and the only time it's held back is if any of the entities, investigatory agencies, say not to make it public. And in my view, that would help establish trust while also preserving the integrity. And then the rule book we have has to be totally rewritten.
But part of this trust factor, Mayor, is people believe that you didn't say anything earlier and you held on to this video because it came out, or the settlement happened around the time you were facing a runoff, and you did this to save your re-election. Yeah. Is that true? Did the election factor into your holding on to this video?
Absolutely not, and you know the facts. I addressed it in the op-ed this weekend, but let me repeat it. February 27th, the family comes forward to the city and asks us to come to an agreement. By late March, we have an agreement in principle, and the first city council we can take it public is in April, and that's exactly how it followed. That said, and the issue as it relates to the video, there was a time out of practice. There was not a decision made to do something different. It was to follow the practice that has existed for a long time in the city, and that's why I think it has to change. And I really want to repeat this,
The practice being that if there's an investigation,
you don't compromise an investigation by giving material out that can somewhat taint or compromise the integrity. Now remember, in this investigation, it's the first time, it led to the first time ever an officer being charged with homicide. And that integrity and that justice, because we preserved it, worked. But that said, trust is an equal, if not more important principle to enshrine, which is why I want to rewrite the rule book as it relates to giving the public the information they need. So that, and especially, I would say it this way, Paris, we're going to expand body cams throughout to a third of the city's police districts. There's going to be more video. So this tape, this policy as it relates to information and tapes has to be rewritten because it is not working to the day and age we have today. It's a practice from years past. It's not consistent with where technology is, and it's not consistent with where the public's expectations are. And I am responsible for changing that, and I'm responsible for allowing to exist, or just practicing it and following it, and now asking some core questions in that process.
Core question, who first told you about the existence of the Laquan McDonald video?
I don't know who first, I was briefed, I don't know about who asked me first or briefed me about a video.
And when was that?
The first person that kind of gave me the description of it was Corporation Counsel Steve Patton. What I do know is, and what I do know, and what I'm assured about, is anytime there's any police shootings, IPRA, the Independent Police Review Authority, is on the scene, and within days, the state's attorney is also opening their own inquiry. There are 2 sets of eyes on any police shooting in any case.
When did you first learn that there were discrepancies between the initial reports from officers on the scene that night and the video? That the video didn't jibe with what the reports were?
I mean, when we get the information that it's public, that's when I learned it like everybody else.
So Superintendent McCarthy, former superintendent, didn't tell you that there might be a problem between what the official reports are and what the video shows?
No, that's not what he briefed me about or anything like that.
Speaking of...
so understand, when there's any police shooting, I'm assured IPRA's there and the state's attorney, so there's inquiry and investigation. The first time kind of the details around Laquan McDonald's situation, what happened, and when I was briefed by Steve Patton, the Corporation Counsel for the City of Chicago, not just about a settlement, about the events, like everybody else, I was taken aback, horrified by what I heard, and I wanted to be assured by Steve, which was there were multiple investigations by multiple entities into it. So it's one thing to come to an agreement with the family about financial, $5 million. But there's another thing, which I had to make sure, is that there were investigations as it relates to also bringing justice to this case. And that's what I was assured about.
Part of bringing justice to this case are the accounts from the other officers that were on the scene. At least 5 other officers backed up Van Dyke's assertion that McDonald was the aggressor. Are those 5 officers still on the street?
I think 2 things that are very important about that for you, Paris. One is that, as you know, the U.S. Attorney for the office for the last 13 months has been investigating all aspects of this event and this scene, and that investigation is going on. And I would say, like everybody else, I would hope they would conclude that because it would answer a lot of questions. And the U.S. Attorney Zach Farden the other day in Washington said that their investigation is ongoing. Second, as you know, tonight, Sharon Farrelly, my recent appointment to the IPRA Board, Independent Police Review Authority, has referred that case and the officers involved in their filings over to the Inspector General.
So the Inspector General will look at this, but isn't it clear that they made false statements from the video?
That's exactly what the Inspector General is going to look at.
And if he finds that they did, will they be fired?
Well, if they filed false reports, of course, that's what recommendation will be given to the superintendent of the police department by the Inspector General. I'm not going to judge what he will conclude, but if that was to be what he would conclude, if you obviously lie and falsify a report, you're fired.
We have a question from a viewer, Timothy Searle, who's worried about the cover-up mentality in the police department. I want to ask you point blank, is there a code of silence that exists among police officers?
Well, this is going to be the short answer is yes. It's one of the subjects I'm going to address tomorrow to the City Council.
There is a code of silence?
Well, look, there's no doubt what we have, and it exists. There's a couple, what I think, let me refer to as a culture. And that is a culture that what we refer to as a thin blue line, etc. You are asked to uphold the law, not act like you're above the law. And your job is, if you see something and say nothing, you're actually adding to a culture. It's about a colleague, I understand that. But there's professional standards. And that's why my first thing about the Department of Justice, we welcome it. We will cooperate with it. It is in our self-interest. We need an outside third party to not only change the rules, but to implement the rules so it begins to change the culture. And the police department, to earn the respect from the community, must show respect. And part of that respect is to know that they are there to uphold the law, not to act like they're above it.
But you've known about this culture problem. Why does it take in the Laquan McDonald video for you to act with this kind of urgency?
Well, there's two things, and I'm not so sure I totally take the premise if I can. As you know, back in August, in fact, on this show, I announced that we were coming to a historic, unprecedented agreement. No other city had done it, between the police department and the ACLU as it relates to kind of the type of stops, the pat-downs, is there any racial bias, and any of the training.
So-called stop and frisk.
Yeah, stop and frisk. No city has done that without the judge ordering it. We did it voluntarily. I also, 3 years ago, had the Safer Commission look at some of the oversight and accountability. Now, what's clear? We haven't gone far enough.
The Safer Commission, they made clear recommendations about internal review.
Let me finish.
Did you adopt those policies?
Yeah, a lot of them we have, and we put a lot of them in place. Some of them we haven't. And what's clear is the work has not been done. Now, when you talk about, there's both policies and practices. I'm responsible to make sure they get implemented and followed, which is why the first recommendation from the task force I've appointed was to have a chief compliance officer at the police department, and we will be making that appointment to make sure that the recommendations don't sit on the shelf, they get implemented. There's a second part, a very tough one, but nonetheless essential. It's one thing to have a practice. It's one thing to have a policy. It is another thing, which is what culture is to change a mindset and to work on an attitude and make people understand in the police department. They have to act with professionalism. They have to have the courage to understand that their professionalism and their trust in the public is not, their loyalty, let me say it this way, is not just to their colleagues, but it's to the public. And when an officer and a colleague acts wrongly, and we have a culture where you're permissive, it undermines your work as a good officer. And we have good officers in the police department, but when you have an officer who is breaking the law, undermining the law, you have a responsibility to make sure that that does not happen. And that culture of permissiveness exists. We have to be honest about it. And I'm going to be honest about it tomorrow, about not only that culture, what good men and women do every day, but when you have a permissive culture, how it undermines the very work of the police department.
Why do you need this task force when that Safer Commission you referenced came up with recommendations on how to improve the internal review process, on how to improve IPRA investigations, on how to discipline
there's
officers?
There's some part of it is like one of the parts of the Safer Commission, and this is the results, is that the cases were languishing too long. And 67% of them are now done within 6 months. And so there has been some effect. The work is not done. This task force, and look, we have to be honest, Paris, as I said yesterday, and I want to repeat, we have come to an inflection point. You know, and if you go around the communities and parts of the city, this is not the first police shooting. And this is not the first police shooting where maybe there wasn't an honest reporting by everybody, other officers there. But it has come to an inflection point where the dam here has been broken open. And it's the same way when you say, why do you need another task force? The same way that we need the Justice Department to help us to clean up something that has happened before, and every measure we have taken to take a corrective step has never measured up to the full scale of all the problems. So I have a task force. We have a new compliance officer. We have a new head of the Independent Police Review Authority. We have an agreement with the ACLU, and we have a Justice Department that will look whole scope from a civil rights perspective and police practices, and we will have to make this change because everything to date has not worked, and we're going to take a whole scale. There's no sacred, no area that's off limits to what we have to look at, what we have to change, and what we have to do to have the discipline, the accountability, the early interdiction, the oversight, and the transparency so the public has trust that the police are being policed.
Speaking of no sacred cows, what about the Fraternal Order of Police? Are they a problem in terms of hamstringing the city, in disciplining bad police officers, the contract with the FOP?
Well, let me say this. They do their job to represent the men and women. That's their responsibility. There's no doubt when you look at certain things, and look, it defies people's common sense. While Officer Van Dyke was immediately stripped of his police authorities. People can't understand how an officer, while under a criminal investigation, is getting paid, but that is in the contract. We're going to have to look at stuff. Don't walk away here and say that's going to be the first time, but we're going to have to look at a whole set of rules, practices in the police department, agreements we have. Are we doing what's necessary so that our good officers can be trusted, and we have a system to deal with the officers who aren't good and are undermining the police department in their work, are dealt with early enough that they don't become a problem, just like Van Dyke.
You say you
and more than just a problem, a criminal act.
You welcome the Department of Justice investigation. If the city needs it now, hasn't the city needed it for years?
Well, I mean, Paris, I think it's fair to say for your audience, Chicago's not the only city that has had the Justice Department from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati to Seattle to Los Angeles, Baltimore, Ferguson. Every city is facing an issue as it relates to police actions, community relations, the breakdown in trust, and its impact on community policing. Chicago, like other cities, is facing that. What's unique is we have our own take. It's a reflection of our history of our city, the culture that's built up, and I got to be honest, and which is what I'm going to talk about. There's an element of race here. There's an element of economics here. There's an element of a breakdown in the community and what's happening in the community being overrun by guns and drugs and violence and what officers face. So it encompasses a lot. We'll talk about it from one perspective, but it engages a lot of stuff, and this is the opportunity to finally fix what is broken and to be honest with people what it's going to take and what people's expectations are. And as mayor, I'm accountable to make those changes and responsible to make sure that they happen.
You've struggled a little bit with your credibility among a lot of people, though, Mayor, because many people in the African American community have believed this has been a problem for years, not just now.
And that is what, as I go around, I was all over the city in a number of grocery stores, community meetings, and I want to talk about a lunch discussion I had with a number of young men of color who were also involved in the criminal justice system and their perspective. Yes, they know it isn't the first time, which is why they've had the perspective, this is just, this is the one that broke, this event is one that broke the dam. They know this is not the first time. And if you ask me, hearing from both folks in the African American community at all ages and police officers, the two things that would seem essential and elemental, but are also the hardest. One, officers have to give young men respect. You want respect? You got to give it. As one young man said to me, do you think a police officer would treat you the way they treat me?
He said that to you?
No, we were sitting around, we were having a round table discussion. A number of kids who were trying to change their lives had been in touch with the criminal justice system. And the honest answer is no. And that's wrong. On the other hand, and the other perspective, you have a lot of officers who have good ideas of how to make changes to bring their standards to the professionalism that they uphold every day. And the other piece of it is there are two cultures. There's a culture that's an acceptance, that we've kind of lowered the norm as an acceptance of violence, not just in Chicago, but in society. And a culture that also is built up in the police department, where you protect the police department, and my view is protecting a colleague is not protecting the police department. Protecting the police department is upholding the highest standards.
Was Gary McCarthy responsible for letting that culture fester?
No, listen, Superintendent McCarthy served the city. Under his watch, in 2014, we had the lowest homicide rate in 50 years. Under his watch, we had a 34% reduction in overall crime in the 4 years. That said, it takes my leadership, and it was time for a new beginning with a new superintendent, but also because of this situation, it is clear we have come as not just an inflection point, we've come face to face with not only our own history, our own sense of what's wrong, and I am responsible to help the city lead the way in fixing it and being honest with people of what it's going to take. And I want to be no bones about this. This is going to be a long, painful road with a lot of ups and downs and a lot of turns, because we're going to touch on a lot of sacred cows and a lot of what we refer to as third rail politics, which is race relations, expectations. Can a young man see an officer beyond his badge to the father he is? And can an officer look at a young man with tattoos and not see a problem and a risk, but maybe that's an artist, an athlete, or a student, or a father himself? And if we can get past our roles to the humanity in us, we're going to solve this problem. But if we can't, we're going to keep building up walls of separation and barriers.
Speaking of barriers coming down, last night the city put out a video showing officers using a taser on a man who later died in custody. This was about 3 years ago this happened. How many more police-involved shootings or incidents are there videos of that are going to come out now?
Let me say specifically to this, and then to the general subject. Make 3 points if I could, Paris. First and foremost, Sharon Farrelly, the new head of IPRA, is reopening an investigation at IPRA on that incident. Second, and I want to be clear about this, while this young man had obviously a mental and emotional breakdown, there's no excuse. If the policy exists that you can drag him out, that policy is wrong. And if the policy doesn't exist and that officer did, it's wrong. He is a human being, not a piece of meat. And that has to be changed. Number two, just let me be clear, we're about to have a third of the city, 7 districts out of 22, that have body cams. So there will be more video, which is why the first thing I've asked Lori Lightfoot and her commission. We don't have the right policy. Yes, we will protect investigations and their integrity and their independence, and we won't compromise them. Yet the public has a right to know, and know soon, because the longer you hold it, nobody had any expectation this would take 13 months. Put that aside.
Did the state's attorney take too long?
I'm not going to, that's her work. I'm not going to comment on it. But that length of time, and then following the practice of their independence, not compromising, not tainting, not in any way influencing it, clearly built up suspicion and distrust. And that has to change. Cincinnati has one model. I said, Lori, this has to be a high priority. Look at it real quickly, because with body cams coming on, the new enforcement and accountability that Acting Superintendent John put in place. Escalante, thank you. John put in place, meaning as it relates to the audio part, there'll be more video all along. And the people and the public rightfully will say, when do we get to see it? Now, I know we have this policy, but we're going to have to rewrite the rule book. It is not up to date with people's expectations and the needs of the city.
Mayor, I'm sorry to cut you off. We have to get to a number of other issues. This week, the teachers union will vote on a possible strike authorization. What's your message to the teachers right now?
Here's what I say to teachers, and I would say to the teachers union. You're putting a lot of energy into a strike. My one request, put as much energy into a solution. Your request is for $1.5 billion while the Chicago Public Schools faces massive deficits. Put the energy towards a solution. Work with the Chicago Public Schools towards an injustice and a wrong at Springfield, where we have 20% of the students of need, students of color, and yet only get 15% of the state's educational funding. Join hands with CPS. A CPS-CTU partnership, arm in arm, will change Springfield. The strike vote distracts from the solution.
I've noticed a lot of emotion in your voice tonight, Mayor. Given what you face politically, what the challenges the city faces, have you thought about resigning in the last few weeks? Has this just gotten too tough?
No. First of all, I love this job. I love this city. I really believe in what we can do. Of course there's emotion. Not because of me, but because of what happened. And we have to fix it. I'm energized by what we have to do as a city, and I'm energized by the challenge. I know that I let people down. I own that. And I'm committed to making a right from a wrong, both for the McDonald family and for the city of Chicago.
Mayor, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. And Phil is back to wrap things up right after this.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by ComEd. ComEd presents the power of a shiny new toy. By switching to LED holiday light strings this season, you could use up to 50% less energy compared to incandescent light strings. ComEd, powering lives.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night, abbreviated so we can bring you special pledge programming. I hope you join us tomorrow night live at 7. Chicago may be next for Google's high-speed internet service expansion, plus a photographer who brings a human focus to conflicts around the world. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season. This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by a grant from the Polk Brothers Foundation. For more than 25 years, a foundation for Chicago families. Watch Chicago Tonight online at WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight or on demand.
Giada Valenti from Venice with Love.
We've only just begun to leave.
Sharing love, laughter, and joy. From Venice, Italy comes the singer known for performing beautiful songs that will touch your soul. Giada Valenti from Venice with Love.
Next on WTTW 11.
Josh Groban presents his favorite Broadway music.
If you want to see Magic Lands, bring him home.
Don't miss Josh Groban Stages Live.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW 11.
A 1, 2.
The groups who defined the 60s and 70s reunite on stage at WTTW.